David Cole was at the pinnacle of his career. As a young, ambitious millionaire, he had built his empire through ruthless business decisions, sharp instincts, and an unyielding drive for success. His wealth had grown exponentially, and with it, so had his ego. But amidst his growing fortune, there was one thing David had left far behind: his heart. David's relationship with Laura, his wife, had once been the center of his world. They had met in college, back when David was still an idealistic entrepreneur with big dreams, but little money. Laura had been the one to support him through the difficult times, believing in him when no one else did. She had been his anchor, his source of calm during the chaos. But as David's fortunes grew, his priorities began to shift. His love for Laura, once pure and deep, was overshadowed by his insatiable hunger for power, recognition, and more wealth. When Laura discovered she was pregnant, she thought the news would bring them closer. She imagined a future where their child would remind David of the man he used to be, the kind-hearted, loving husband who valued family over money. But when she told David about the baby, his reaction was far from what she had expected. Instead of joy, there was silence. Instead of excitement, there was hesitation. David didn't want to be tied down. A baby would be a distraction, a complication in his carefully crafted life. The thought of late-night feedings, school runs, and the responsibility of raising a child filled him with dread. He had board meetings to attend, deals to close, and companies to acquire. There was no room for fatherhood in his fast-paced, high-stakes world. One evening, David made the decision that would change both their lives forever. He came home late, the sound of his polished shoes echoing in the quiet hallway of their luxurious penthouse. Laura sat on the couch, her hand resting on her small but noticeable baby bump. She had waited for him all evening, hoping that tonight would be different. But as soon as David walked in, she could sense the distance in his eyes. "We need to talk," he said, his voice cold and businesslike, as if he were closing a deal. Laura's heart sank. She had seen this coming but had prayed it wouldn't happen. She stood up, her eyes searching his face for any sign of the man she had fallen in love with. But the man standing before her was a stranger. "I can't do this anymore, Laura," David continued, his gaze drifting toward the floor. "I can't be tied down by a family. I have too much at stake." Laura felt a sharp pain in her chest. She wanted to scream, to plead with him, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, tears welled up in her eyes as she realized the gravity of what was happening. David wasn't just abandoning her, he was abandoning their unborn child, the life they had created together. "I don't want to fight," he added, sensing her pain but unable to offer comfort. "I'll take care of you financially. You won't want for anything." Laura's tears fell silently as David's words cut deeper. He was offering her money as if that could replace the love and support she needed, as if that could ever make up for the fact that he was walking away from their family. "You can't just leave, David," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I'm pregnant. We're supposed to be a family." But David had already made up his mind. His eyes were cold and distant, devoid of the warmth they once held. He turned his back to her, walking toward the door. "I'm sorry, Laura," he said, his hand on the door handle. "But this is what's best for both of us." And with that, he was gone. The sound of the door closing behind him felt like the final blow, and Laura collapsed onto the couch, sobbing. She held her belly, whispering words of comfort to the life growing inside her, even though she herself felt utterly broken. In the days that followed, Laura made the decision to leave the city. Everywhere she turned, there were reminders of David, his name on skyscrapers, his face in magazines, and whispers of his success in social circles. She couldn't stay in a place that constantly reminded her of the man who had abandoned her. With what little she had, Laura packed her bags and moved to a small, quiet town far from the glitz and glamour of David's world. It was a modest place with cozy houses and friendly neighbors, a stark contrast to the high society life she had once known. There she found solace. Though the pain of David's betrayal lingered, she knew she had to be strong for her baby. She found work at a local diner, living frugally but managing to create a simple, stable life. As the months passed, Laura began to heal. The small-town community embraced her, offering support when they noticed her growing belly and her quiet determination to move forward. She gave birth to a beautiful boy, Liam, and in that moment, she found a new purpose. Liam was her light, her reason for everything, and no matter how hard it was to raise him alone, she knew she would never trade him for anything. Meanwhile, David continued his rise to power. He buried himself in his work, distancing himself from any reminders of the life he had left behind. He surrounded himself with luxury, power, and influence. But deep down, there was an emptiness that no amount of success could fill. Every now and then, a fleeting memory of Laura would surface, but he quickly pushed it aside, convincing himself that he had made the right decision. As David's empire expanded, so did the distance between him and the family he had forsaken. He told himself that he was living the life he had always wanted, but in the quiet moments, when the crowds had left and the deals were done, he couldn't help but wonder if he had made a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Unbeknownst to him, that mistake would soon come back to confront him in ways he could never have anticipated. Laura sat by the window of their small but cozy house, watching the early morning sun rise above the quiet streets of the small town. The light filtered through the trees, casting a soft golden glow over everything. In the distance, she could hear birds singing, the sound a reminder that a new day had begun. Yet for Laura, every new day brought its own set of challenges. She had long since left behind the luxurious life she once shared with David, and now every moment was a test of her strength and resilience. It had been nearly 10 years since David had walked out of her life, and not a day went by that she didn't think about how different her world had become. The transition from being the wife of a millionaire to a single mother struggling to make ends meet had been grueling, but it was a change she had embraced with fierce determination. Her son, Liam, had become the center of her universe, and every sacrifice she made was for him. From the day Liam was born, Laura had known that raising him alone would be no easy task. The small town she had moved to offered little in terms of opportunity, and the jobs available were far from the glamorous positions she might have held in the city. Still, she took whatever work she could find, knowing that every dollar earned was a step toward providing a better life for her son. Her days were spent juggling multiple jobs, working as a waitress at a diner in the mornings, cleaning houses in the afternoons, and taking on sewing projects for the local community in her spare time. It was exhausting, but Laura never complained. Her hands, once soft and manicured, had become calloused from hours of work. Her back ached, and her feet were often sore by the time she collapsed into bed each night. But through it all, there was a fire inside her that kept her going. That fire was Liam. Liam had grown into a bright, kind-hearted boy with an inquisitive mind and a contagious smile. From the moment he could walk, he had been Laura's shadow, following her everywhere, asking questions about the world around him. He had a natural curiosity, always eager to learn new things. Though they didn't have much, Laura had made sure that Liam's life was filled with love and warmth. She couldn't give him the expensive toys or lavish experiences that other children might have had, but what she could give him was far more valuable: a sense of security, a heart full of love, and lessons about life that would stay with him forever. As Liam grew older, he began to notice the struggles his mother faced. Though Laura tried to shield him from the harshness of their reality, Liam was perceptive. He saw the long hours she worked, the tired look in her eyes, and the way she would sometimes skip meals to make sure there was enough for him. It broke his heart, but it also made him determined to help her in any way he could. At school, Liam excelled in his studies. His teachers often remarked on his intelligence and compassion, and he quickly became a favorite among his classmates. But despite his popularity, Liam never let it go to his head. He remained humble, always willing to lend a hand to anyone who needed it, whether it was helping a classmate with their homework or standing up for someone who was being bullied. Laura had taught him the importance of kindness, and he carried that lesson with him everywhere he went. But what struck most people about Liam was his striking resemblance to David. His dark hair, piercing blue eyes, and chiseled features were almost an exact replica of his father. Every time Laura looked at him, she saw David's face staring back at her, a painful reminder of the man who had abandoned them. But instead of letting that reminder fill her with bitterness, Laura chose to focus on the joy that Liam brought to her life. He was her anchor, her reason to keep going, even on the hardest days. Despite their financial struggles, Laura and Liam found joy in the simple things. They would spend their weekends exploring the woods near their home, building forts out of fallen branches, and pretending they were on grand adventures. At night, they would sit by the fire and read books together, with Liam's favorite stories being tales of knights and heroes. Laura often marveled at how much Liam loved stories of bravery and honor, traits that he seemed to embody himself. There were moments, though, when Laura couldn't help but feel the weight of her circumstances pressing down on her. Late at night, when Liam was asleep and the house was quiet, she would sit at the kitchen table, staring at the stack of bills that seemed to grow larger with each passing month. No matter how hard she worked, it was never enough. The fear of not being able to provide for her son gnawed at her constantly, and there were nights when she cried herself to sleep, the burden of being both mother and father too much to bear. But no matter how difficult things got, Laura never let her son see her despair. She knew that Liam looked up to her, and she didn't want him to worry. Instead, she focused on teaching him the values that had gotten her through the darkest times: perseverance, resilience, and the belief that no matter how hard life became, they could always get through it together. Liam had a deep sense of empathy, something Laura had nurtured in him from a young age. He would often tell her, "Mom, when I grow up, I'm going to take care of you. You won't have to work so hard anymore." Those words warmed Laura's heart, though she always responded with a smile and said, "Liam, you already take care of me, more than you know." Though Liam knew nothing of his father, there was an unspoken understanding between Laura and her son. She had never lied to him about David. She had simply told him that his father had chosen a different path. It wasn't an easy conversation to have, but Laura had always believed that honesty was the best policy. As Liam grew older, he asked fewer questions about David, focusing instead on the life he and his mother had built together. He knew that whatever their past had been, their future was something they could shape together. In the small town where they lived, Laura and Liam had become beloved figures. The townspeople admired Laura's strength and resilience, and they adored Liam's sweet nature and bright mind. Though their life was far from easy, it was rich in love and community, and that was something money could never buy. But even as Laura found solace in the life she had created, there was always a lingering thought in the back of her mind. A thought of David, the man who had left them behind. She had tried to move on, but the pain of his abandonment never fully disappeared. And though Liam never spoke of it, there were times when she caught him staring at the few old photos she had of David, his brow furrowed in thought. She knew that one day, Liam would seek answers, and when that time came, she would be ready to face the past she had tried so hard to leave behind. For now, though, Laura focused on the present. She worked tirelessly to provide for her son, and in return, Liam gave her a reason to keep fighting. Together, they faced the world with quiet strength, knowing that whatever challenges came their way, they could overcome them as long as they had each other. What neither of them knew was that their lives were about to change in ways they could never have imagined. The past, long buried and left behind, was about to resurface, bringing with it secrets that would shatter the fragile peace they had worked so hard to build. The airport buzzed with the usual chaos of travelers hustling through terminals, luggage wheels rolling across the floors, and the constant chatter of voices blending into an indistinct hum. David strode through the crowd with purpose, his designer suitcase gliding effortlessly behind him as he checked his phone for the latest updates on his upcoming business trip. His sharp suit, impeccable as always, drew glances from passers-by, but David barely noticed. He had become accustomed to the attention over the years. After all, he was no longer the man he once was, a man struggling to make his mark in the business world. Now he was a powerful, self-made millionaire, respected and envied by many. Yet despite all his success, there was an emptiness inside him that lingered beneath the surface. David rarely allowed himself to dwell on it, but every now and then, the memories of his past crept up on him, gnawing at his conscience. The day he had left Laura, pregnant and alone, was one of those memories. He had told himself that it was for the best, that he needed to focus on building his empire. But deep down, he knew that his decision had been driven by selfishness. Laura had loved him with a sincerity that he hadn't appreciated at the time. He had been too consumed by his ambition, too focused on his pursuit of wealth, to recognize the gravity of what he was leaving behind. As David made his way toward the departure gate, his mind was filled with thoughts of his upcoming meetings and negotiations. The airport's atmosphere, bustling with energy, suited him well. It reminded him of the fast-paced life he thrived in. Yet just as he was about to continue forward, something, or rather, someone, made him stop in his tracks. There, standing a few feet away, was a woman with a young boy beside her. They were facing away from him, but something about the woman's posture, the way she held herself, tugged at David's memory. He felt a strange sense of familiarity wash over him, though he couldn't place it at first. The woman bent down to adjust something in the boy's backpack, and it was then that David saw her profile. His breath caught in his throat. It was Laura. For a moment, David stood frozen, his heart pounding in his chest as if he had just seen a ghost. He hadn't laid eyes on Laura in nearly a decade, but there was no mistaking it. Her once soft, youthful face was now marked with the subtle lines of time, but her beauty remained undeniable. She had aged gracefully, and despite the years that had passed, there was still an air of strength and resilience about her that David had always admired. But it wasn't just Laura that had caught David's attention. The boy standing next to her, tall for his age and with a strikingly familiar set of features, had David's heart racing for an entirely different reason. The boy looked almost exactly like him. His dark hair, the shape of his eyes, even the way he stood. It was like looking at a younger version of himself. David's mind raced, trying to process what he was seeing. Could it be? Could this boy be his son? David felt a wave of emotion crash over him. Shock, disbelief, and a profound sense of regret all tangled together in a knot that tightened in his chest. His gaze flicked between Laura and the boy, his thoughts spiraling. How could he have been so blind? How could he have walked away from them all those years ago, not knowing the life he had abandoned? The boy turned slightly, giving David a clearer view of his face, and the resemblance became even more undeniable. David's hands began to tremble slightly as the realization settled in. This was his son, the son he had never known, the son he had never held, never seen grow up. His mind reeled with the enormity of it all. He had missed everything, the first steps, the first words, the milestones, the moments that every father should cherish. And here he was, standing just a few feet away from them, the family he had left behind without a second thought. As the shock subsided, another emotion took its place: guilt. A crushing weight of guilt that threatened to overwhelm him. What had he done? How could he ever make up for the years he had lost, for the pain he had caused Laura, and for the life he had denied this boy? He had built an empire, amassed more wealth than he could have ever dreamed of. But standing there in that airport, none of it seemed to matter. The success, the money, the power, it all felt hollow in comparison to the family he had forsaken. David's feet felt heavy as he took a step forward, his eyes locked on Laura and the boy. He wanted to approach them, but fear held him back. What would he say? How would he explain himself after all these years? Would they even want to see him? He imagined the anger Laura must feel toward him, the resentment that had likely built up over the years. And the boy, Liam, David assumed. What would he think of the father who had abandoned him before he was even born? As David hesitated, unsure of how to proceed, Laura straightened up and turned to face the direction he was standing. Their eyes met, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. Laura's expression shifted from surprise to recognition, and then something else, something more guarded, more uncertain. David felt his stomach drop. The connection they had once shared, the love they had once had, was buried beneath years of pain and distance. He could see it in her eyes. Laura didn't move. She simply stared at him, her lips pressed together in a thin line as if bracing herself for whatever was to come. David, on the other hand, felt his entire world tilt on its axis. He had spent the last decade running from his past, immersing himself in his business to forget the choices he had made. But here, in this airport, the past had found him. The boy, Liam, looked up at his mother, noticing the change in her demeanor. He followed her gaze and spotted David standing there, motionless. There was a flicker of curiosity in his eyes as he studied the stranger, who seemed so familiar, yet so unknown. David took a deep breath, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew he couldn't walk away now, not after everything. He had to face this. Face Laura, face his son, and face the consequences of his choices. With a mixture of fear and determination, David took another step forward. "Laura," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but loud enough for her to hear. Laura didn't respond at first. She looked at him, her expression unreadable, before finally speaking. "David." Her voice was calm, but there was a sharp edge to it, a guardedness that David couldn't ignore. She had every right to be angry with him, to hate him for what he had done. But there was something else in her eyes too, something that gave him a sliver of hope. Perhaps it was the years they had shared before everything went wrong, or perhaps it was the fact that they now had a son together, a connection that could never be broken. Liam glanced between his mother and David, sensing the tension but not fully understanding it. "Mom, who is he?" he asked, his voice filled with curiosity. Laura hesitated, her gaze still fixed on David. He's someone from a long time ago." David felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to say something, anything, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. How could he explain who he was to this boy? How could he make up for all the lost time? Finally, David spoke, his voice thick with emotion. "Liam, I'm your father." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning, as the three of them stood there in the midst of the bustling airport. It was a moment that would change all of their lives forever. David stood rooted to the spot, his chest tight as he watched the boy, his son, look up at Laura with confusion in his eyes. Liam's question lingered in the air, the unspoken tension palpable. The bustling noise of the airport faded into the background as David's heart pounded in his ears. This was the moment that had haunted him for so many years, the moment when he would finally face the consequences of his choices. With a deep breath, David forced himself to take a step forward, his eyes locked on Laura. Her face was calm, but her posture was stiff, protective, as if she were shielding Liam from the truth that lay between them. David couldn't blame her for it. He had abandoned her at the worst possible time, leaving her to raise their son alone, while he chased wealth and success. The guilt gnawed at him, but it was nothing compared to the sight of the boy standing beside her, the boy he had never known, yet who carried his own likeness. "Laura," David said, his voice faltering as he approached. He had imagined this reunion 1,000 times, but now that it was happening, he found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain the years of silence, the absence, the betrayal? His gaze flickered to Liam, whose wide eyes were filled with curiosity, unaware of the storm brewing beneath the surface. Laura met his gaze, her expression unreadable. There was no warmth in her eyes, but there was no anger either, just a guarded resolve. She had become stronger, David realized over the years, stronger than he had ever imagined. The woman he had once left behind was no longer the vulnerable, heartbroken figure he remembered. She was a mother now, and her strength came from the love she had for the son they shared. David swallowed hard, feeling a lump in his throat. He wanted to say so many things, to apologize, to explain himself, to make up for all the lost time, but he didn't know where to begin. His hands trembled slightly as he stood before them, a man who had built an empire, but had lost everything that truly mattered. "Laura, I didn't expect to see you here," he said awkwardly, his voice wavering. He winced at how pathetic he sounded. This wasn't the confident businessman he was known for. This was a man grappling with the mistakes of his past. Laura's lips tightened into a thin line, and for a moment, David thought she might turn and walk away without a word. But she didn't. Instead, she took a deep breath, her gaze steady as she looked at him. "I didn't expect to see you either, David," she said, her tone measured and calm. "It's been a long time." The weight of her words hit him like a punch to the gut. It had been a long time, too long. He had missed everything. The realization made his chest ache, but he knew that no amount of regret could change the past. Liam shifted beside his mother, glancing between the two adults with growing curiosity. "Mom, who is this man?" he asked again, his innocent voice cutting through the tension like a knife. David's heart clenched at the question. This was his son, yet the boy had no idea who he was. He had missed the chance to watch him grow up, to be there for his first steps, his first words, his first day of school. And now, standing in front of them, he was nothing more than a stranger. Laura's hand gently rested on Liam's shoulder, a subtle gesture of protection. She hesitated for a moment before responding, her voice soft but firm. "This is someone I used to know," she said carefully, her eyes never leaving David's. "A long time ago." David flinched inwardly at her choice of words. Someone I used to know. It was true. He was no longer a part of their lives, no longer the man she had once loved, no longer the father Liam had never known. But hearing it spoken aloud stung more than he had expected. Liam's brow furrowed in confusion, sensing that there was more to the story than his mother was telling him. His gaze lingered on David, and for the first time, David saw a flicker of recognition in the boy's eyes, perhaps a subconscious understanding of the resemblance between them. The boy didn't know the full truth, but something about the stranger before him felt familiar. David's throat tightened as he struggled to find the right words. He couldn't lie to Liam, not after everything, but he also knew that the truth would change everything, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for that. I'm sorry, Laura," David said quietly, his voice thick with emotion. "I know I've made mistakes. I know I wasn't there when I should have been, but I want to make things right." Laura's expression didn't waver. "You think you can make things right with money?" she asked, her voice cold but controlled. "You think that offering us financial support will erase the years of abandonment?" David opened his mouth to respond, but the words caught in his throat. He had come here, ready to offer them everything he had, his wealth, his resources, anything they needed. But as he stood there, facing Laura's unwavering strength and Liam's innocence, he realized how hollow those offers were. Money couldn't fix what was broken. It couldn't replace the years he had lost with his son or the pain he had caused Laura. "No," David said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "No, I know it won't. But I don't know what else to do. I want to be a part of his life. I want to be there for him." If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more like it, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. Let me know in the comments what you thought about the story and share any themes or ideas you'd like to hear in future stories. Your feedback means the world to me. Thanks for watching.